Good evening, Coppin State University. Good evening, Coppin State University. Good evening, Baltimore. Good evening, Maryland. Good evening, world. My name is Dr. Ronald C. Williams. I am business faculty here at Coppin State University and director of the Center for Strategic Entrepreneurship. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Economic Empowerment Gubernatorial Candidate Forum, being held right here on the beautiful campus of Coppin State University in Baltimore, Maryland. We are streaming live. We are streaming on Coppin Watch, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. So we welcome all of our viewers who are viewing not only in the state, but around the country. The information that you're going to receive tonight focuses on economic empowerment, economic development for not only the citizens of the state, but the citizens of West Baltimore. And before we go any further, it is my honor to welcome to the podium the president of Coppin State University, Dr. Anthony L. Jenkins. Won't you greet him with a round of applause?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I am Anthony Jenkins, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as president of Coppin State University. It is an honor to welcome you all here this evening to our beautiful campus and to the first Economic Empowerment Gubernatorial Candidate Forum. And I would like to thank all of our candidates for being here this evening with us. I would also like to acknowledge any elected officials that we have in the audience with us. If you are here, please stand and be recognized. As an anchor institution and a leader in urban higher education, Coppin State University is dedicated to transforming lives through academics and community engagement. Our mission includes fostering a community of culturally competent leaders, responsible citizens, civic and community engagement, cultural diversity and inclusion, and economic development. Tonight, we have invited the candidates here to engage in a conversation as they seek the bid for Maryland's next governor. This evening, they will talk about important issues such as education, healthcare, housing, income and poverty, social justice, public safety, transportation, and the environment. All important issues that will impact our communities for generations to come. Our hope is that the candidates joining us this evening will keep the concerns of the community in mind as they continue to campaign through July's primary and November's general election. I also want to acknowledge and sincerely thank for joining us this evening, WMAR2 news anchor Kelly Swoop for moderating tonight's event. And I want to encourage those who have not registered to vote to please get out and do so. The primary election again is July 19th, and the general election will take place on November 8th. At this point, I will turn it back over to Dr. Ronald Williams. And again, thank you for joining us this evening. Dr. Williams.
Before we move into the discussion, I want to thank several people for making this possible. First of all, the administration and faculty and staff of Coppin State University, this fine institution. I really want to thank our alumni. The Center for Strategic Entrepreneurship has an alumni board of advisors, and they have worked hard and given their energy and brought their resources to the table to help bring this to pass. I want to thank the candidates, many of them who said immediately, once we made the announcement, they said immediately that they would be here. I want to thank the support staff of Coppin State University and the CSE. We are few in number, but we do believe that one can chase 1,000. So I really want to thank them. I want to thank the students. You see their brilliance all around. Some of them met you as you arrived. You see them serving in the lobby and in the aisles and helping to bring this to pass. Our students are why we are here. And I want to thank them for bringing their brilliance to the table. And I also want to thank our public officials who are present. Dr. Jenkins already acknowledged you. And this event is a pre-conference event. On Thursday and Friday of this week, we have our Economic Inclusion Conference at Coppin. This year, we have 3 tracks. We have over 25 sessions, 60 speakers, 32 organizations locally and across this nation. 75% of it is virtual. So if you would like to log in, please make sure that you go to the Coppin website page and just type in EICAC, and you will be able to participate in the conference free of charge as we continue to share information about how we will have a brighter future. Before I introduce our moderator this evening, let me just say all candidates were invited to participate. There was a threshold in which we set, and part of that threshold and part of the criteria was that they accept public financing, the public financing system for candidates. So we have our 7 candidates here who responded. We are grateful to them for their presence. We look forward to the information that they will be sharing, and for the quality of the experience, and for the viewers, for those present and for those who are watching live on stream. We ask that you would hold your applause, that no loud expressions or any behavior that may distract the candidate or take away from the experience of our fellow attendees. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the evening, Ms. Kelly Swoop, who joined WMAR 2 News team in July of 2003, and it's been a member, that's been her home ever since. She is the anchor for news at 5, 6, 7, and 11. In addition to the volunteer work that she does around the city, she's also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, Jack and Jill, Baltimore, the Baltimore chapter. And let me say, she has absolutely come a long way from that high school job as a popcorn serving professional at a theater, all the way to anchor at WMAR. So won't you put your hands together and welcome Ms. Kelly Swoop.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
They have worked hard to put this together, so let's give Coppin a large round of applause. So imagine having an economic inclusion conference and a gubernatorial debate in the same week. That's pretty impressive. All right, we got the primary coming up on July 19th, so hearing from these candidates tonight will help you make some decisions on who to move forward in terms of the debate. So we'll welcome the candidates shortly with the bios, but I'd like to come down and say hi to y'all first. Isn't it nice to be in person? Yeah. Anybody else happy to be in person?
Yeah.
I certainly am. We have folks that are streaming live as well, so you can see this all over Maryland as well as all over the country, and even my parents in Arizona who are watching. So got to give them a shout out as well because they're from Northern Virginia, so they follow Maryland politics. But we're going to get to the candidate bios. We have lots of rules that we're going to have to follow, but we're going to kind of keep it tight so we can get the questions in. We are talking about all important issues that impact all of us in our communities. I'm talking about education, healthcare, income, poverty, everything. So I'm going to introduce our candidates and we will get started. All right, candidate first is Rashawn Baker, Prince George's County Executive for 8 years. He was recognized by Governing Magazine for his leadership. He 2 terms as the chair of the County Exec of Americas, served on numerous boards, including the National Association of Counties, the Maryland Association of Counties, the Metro Washington Council of Governments. Please give Rashawn Baker a warm welcome. John Barron, an extensive career in public service and government reform, congressional staffer who worked with members of Congress to create programs that awards $450 million each year to small tech companies. As a Clinton administration official, he headed a nearly $1 billion technology program that won all kinds of awards, and he also founded a nonprofit known for advancing evidence based on policy making, and has been an appointee on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republican administrations. Give Mr. Barron a warm of applause. Peter Franchot, Maryland's 33rd Comptroller. In 2007, as Comptroller, he serves on the Board of Public Works along with the Governor and the Treasurer. Prior to Comptroller, he served in Maryland House of Delegates for 20 years. He's a member of the Appropriations Committee and Chair of Transportation and Environment Subcommittees. Give him a warm welcome, Peter Franchot. Doug Gansler, Maryland's Attorney General from 2007 to 2015. He focused on issues such as consumer protection, environmental justice, increasing minimum wage. Before AG, he served 8 years as the state attorney for Montgomery County, and he prosecuted several high-profile cases, most notably the Beltway Snipers case, John Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo. Give him a big warm welcome, please. Wes Moore, most recently CEO of the nonprofit Robin Hood Foundation. That nonprofit focused on fighting poverty all across the world. He's a combat veteran who served as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division and captain in the U.S. Army, Rhodes Scholar, and a candidate with strong ties to Baltimore from the time he spent here, and a New York Times bestseller, his book, The Other Wes Moore. Warm welcome. Tom Perez, former Secretary of Labor under the Obama administration, first Dominican American to chair the Democratic National Committee, attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, as well as serving on the Montgomery County Council and Council President. Warm welcome, Mr. Perez. Dr. Jerome Siegel, an American philosopher, founder of the socialist group Bread and Roses Party, author of The Graceful Simplicity, The Philosophy and Politics of Simple Living, and he stresses involvement in electoral politics, and he's our only candidate to have run for president. Run for president. Give him a round of applause, everybody. So as the candidates are aware, we're going to talk about issues that impact all of us. We're talking about education, healthcare, housing, income and poverty, social justice, personal and public safety, transportation, and the environment as well. And these are issues that impact not just West Baltimore, but the whole state of Maryland. With any forum, any debate, you're going to have rules. The candidates are aware of the rules, so I'm going to share them briefly with you. There will be no opening statements by the candidates before the start of questioning. The order of the candidates answering the questions has already been selected. A second drawing was held to determine who will give the closing statements, which they will all have a 2-minute closing statement. I know it's not a lot of time, but neither is 90 seconds. That's what they have to answer the questions. I'm going to address my first question to all the candidates. Candidates' responses to the question, again, 90 seconds, and candidate responses may prompt follow-up questions for discussion. They will be informed of when their time up. We have our timekeepers right here, so don't be surprised if you see a yellow card or a red card. Christy, in the audience right here to keep us all on time. And again, 2 minutes for the closing statement. So we're going to start tonight talking about education. That is something that is near and dear to all of us. You have children, you have grandchildren, you have nieces and nephews, something that we're all entitled to, worried about. So the Blueprint Plan, that is a 13-year plan for investment and opportunity for the Maryland State Education Association. You, one of you, will accept the established strategic plan for the future of education in Maryland. You can actually inherit it, not accept it. You can inherit it. As governor, how will you prioritize, assure accountability, and track the progress of Maryland's Blueprints Implementation Plan? And Peter Franchot, you receiving the order. First question.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And I just want to say thanks to Coppin for hosting this wonderful event, Professor Jenkins or Dr. Jenkins, and but to the students, there are 2,700 students here at Coppin. And I just want to say you should be so proud of this institution. It's a historically Black college university. It is a fabulous place where prominent people like Senator Verner Welcome graduated. Each of you should have the self-confidence and the skills and knowledge to get into the workforce and do something, either be a candidate like us, be the owner of a business, work for a big nonprofit, I just want to say that our 4 public HBCUs in the state are phenomenal. Now, we're going to need every one of you to stay here in Maryland because we're going to need a big workforce. But as far as the Kerwin plan, obviously that is something that has been extended now because of the budgetary situation down in Annapolis. As governor, I'm going to make sure that Kerwin is implemented. I believe in Kerwin. I believe in K through 12 education. But I'm also going to free our teachers from the burden of standardized testing. Thank you. Am I? Yes. Well, thank you for saying that. I thought that was the timekeeper. But we're also going to pick up the morale of the kids and have them be high morale, working together as a team, working together as a group on different projects. We're going to raise the morale of them. And thank you very much for your time. And the first question.
Tom Perez.
It's an honor to be back here at Coppin State University. So thank you for having us here tonight. Folks, the brilliance of the blueprint is that it focuses on cradle through career. It recognizes that learning starts at birth and goes through adulthood. So the implementer in chief, and that will be the next governor, is going to be responsible for making sure we're overseeing birth to 0 to 4. And all too many kids, disproportionately kids of color, are way too far behind by the time you're 4 years old, by the time you enter kindergarten. And then focusing on K to 12. And one of the things we have to do, and this is where HBCUs can play a huge role, is making sure that we are producing a diverse pipeline of educators. Our racial demographic profile of our student body across the state does not match the racial demographic profile of our educators. In other words, our educators are disproportionately white. Our students are disproportionately non-white. My running mate, Shannon Sneed, went to undergrad at UMES, got her graduate degree at Morgan, and taught right here at Coppin. And she is going to help us lead the effort to make sure we are diversifying our educator profession. Then we also have to make sure at a high school level that we're investing in career and technical education. Because while I love being on a college campus, college isn't for everyone. And we are investing in career and technical education because we have remarkable opportunities to build an offshore wind ecosystem here, $30 to $40 an hour union jobs. And so again, as your former labor secretary, I did a lot of work in the workforce space, apprenticeship, other issues like that. And we will work from cradle through career to implement, working together with everyone.
Thank you, Candidate Perez. Next question, actually, Dr. Siegel, you're up next.
Yeah.
You need to repeat the question? You could.
Same question.
Okay, yes.
Glad to address it. If I get elected governor, Maryland will have, for better or worse, someone who taught philosophy of education at the University of Pennsylvania. My view on the blueprint is that it is 2 very different documents. One has to do with social justice. It has to do with the allocation of funds. It has to do with zip codes and what's invested in your education and closing all the social justice gaps. On that, it's the gold standard for the United States. There's another part of it that has to do with the mission of schools, in particular the mission of public schools. On that part of it, it's actually the most impoverished document that any commission in the United States has ever produced. And I told this to the Maryland State Education Association a few weeks ago when I addressed them. I will implement faithfully and vigorously the social justice part. When it comes to accountability to the actual stuff that has to do with education, no way. I will introduce new legislation and use the powers of the governor to make sure it doesn't happen. And to get right into it, you have to ask the question, what are the missions, plural, of public schools in this society? And I would relate it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's not one mission, right? The blueprint focuses on one mission and a narrow mission, which has to do with getting a good job, getting ahead of the other guy in the competition for the limited number of jobs. But you start with life, okay? Mm-hmm. You've got kids who are killing each other. They got to learn conflict resolution. People have got to learn about their mental health has to be protected. While students, the family has to not be put through anxiety. You talk about liberty. People have to know how to defend their liberty. You have to develop virtues. They have to know the 1619 Project. You got to know the history of this country. You got to have the virtue to count votes accurately when you've got a criminal president trying to talk you out of it.
Okay, candidate
In
Siegel.
pursuit of happiness, you've got to know how to add beauty to
Okay.
the world. If you can add
Sorry to
beauty
cut
the
you off,
world,
but we're going to have to
you'll be
move on to the
respected
next
by
candidate.
everyone your entire life and happy.
Thank you. Thank you. Candidate Moore,
Right.
90 seconds.
Thank you. Good evening. And it's great to be back at Coppin. And thank you so much for starting with this question as well, because, you know, my background is I come from a long line of preachers and teachers. That's my family's background. And I was very proud to have a chance to work on the blueprint. I was very proud to testify on behalf of the blueprint. And I'll be very proud to make sure that our administration will fully fund the blueprint, and we'll work in partnership with our educators to be able to fully implement the blueprint, and we will not retreat from that. And when we say, what does that mean? It means that we are going to invest in 21st century schools. I mean, earlier today, I had a chance to spend time with our remarkable state senator from the 40th, Antonio Hayes. And we got a chance to go by Dorothy Heights, a 21st century school here in West Baltimore. But here's the thing that we also know, that there are still schools in West Baltimore, in Baltimore, and throughout the state of Maryland where students still cannot drink from the water fountains because of lead. And students do not have air conditioning and proper ventilation. We are going to make sure that we invest in having pre-K for every child in need in the state of Maryland. 80% of brain development happens in a child by the time that child is 5 years old. So why we are starting school at 5 for children makes absolutely no sense. We will fix that. We will make historic investments in apprenticeship programs and trade programs and also P-Tech platforms. So we're giving our students a pathway from an early stage in their development to know that our economy has a place for them too. We are going to make sure we're creating the proper pipelines and investing in our HBCUs for the top HBCUs in the country to make sure that our teacher workforce represents our student body. And we're going to make sure that our educators, paraeducators, and our ESPs all throughout the state of Maryland are getting the pay that they deserve and the pay that their work, their service to our state properly demands. And we're going to do that in effort, and we're going to do that in a full coordination to make sure the blueprint is fully implemented. Our administration will not retreat from that.
Thank you, candidate Moore. Doug Gansler.
Thank you for starting with that question, because this forum tonight is about economic empowerment. And without education, there is no economic empowerment. It is the tool to success, the tool to going forward, to building a business and to building a better society, and to give each individual a plan forward. And so the great thing about what we have in Maryland is we actually have the blueprint. We don't have to invent the blueprint. It's already there, ready for us. The key thing is, can we get a Democrat elected? And so when we look at this election, people always say, oh, it's the most important election for any politician. It is the most important election for our education system, because if we don't have a Democrat that can actually beat Kelly Schultz in November, then the blueprint will go into the trash can. And second, we'll get to down the road, which is Baltimore. And Baltimore needs a Democratic governor. So the most important aspect of the blueprint is pre-K. I've been talking about it for now 10 years. It's great to be back at Coppin, where we've been talking about this issue. And we need to make sure that by the time that students arrive in kindergarten, the gap is not so wide they can never catch up. And that's why we need universal pre-K. That's why we need universal childcare, and we can pay for it by the surplus that we have now, plus legalization of cannabis. We need to make sure our schools are safe. Every school needs to have an SRO. We send way too many children into the juvenile justice system. We need to stop that pipeline. We need to resolve crimes and violence and issues that occur in schools in the school. I remember I went to Patterson Park to speak at a high school when I was Attorney General, and I said to somebody, "Can a child learn here and can they actually get an education?" And the guy looked at me like I was crazy. We need to fix that.
Thank you. John Barron.
Thank you. So here's the big picture in education. More than a quarter of middle school students in the state of Maryland can't read at a basic level. More than a third can't do basic math. Those numbers are no different than they were 20 years ago. And that is true even though Maryland saw a major rise in education spending during the 2000s, about a 40% increase in education spending per pupil after adjusting for inflation. The Kirwan Commission found that despite that, there was no improvement in student outcomes. The problem is that many educational programs and policies, no matter how well-intentioned they are, do not work, as we've seen too often when the results are measured. So I do support strongly the blueprint legislation. and I would implement it, but I would implement it differently. I would make sure that those resources, the new resources, are not just spending on well-intentioned programs that sound logical. We need to focus the new spending in implementing the Kerwin recommendations, the blueprint, on programs that have actually been tested in the real world and shown to make a big difference in people's lives. As one example, when I'm governor, we will expand high-quality tutoring to every struggling first and second grader in the entire state of Maryland, because that's been shown to move them up toward grade level early in school before their problems get serious in later grades. We're going to do it by recruiting an army of people from the community, including retirees and recent college graduates, to become tutors for a modest stipend as a public service. There are other examples. We can expand KIPP charter schools, which are no excuses charter schools, extremely effective. And I look forward to discussing others as well.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Mr. Baker.
First of all, I want to thank Coppin State for putting on this debate tonight. It's good to be here as a fellow HBCU graduate from Howard, running with, you know, there you go. We got some whose running mate, Nancy Navarro, who's an immigrant from Venezuela, who married an immigrant from Haiti, but sent her two Afro-Latino daughters to Howard University, you know. So it's good to be here with this forum. And it's an appropriate question to start us off. And I heard what everyone said. And they're right for the most part. But here's the thing. After actually working on this for 8 years in one of the schools in one of the systems in this state that has struggled, Prince George's County, not only working with that, but putting all three of my children through some of the best education and some of the worst education. And we talk about the blueprint like that's the first iteration. If it had not been for Baltimore City, we wouldn't see the blueprint. You know why? Because we got thwarted, because Baltimore City was about to sue the state for not funding Baltimore City adequately. Because Baltimore City sued the state and brought this up, we were able to get money for everybody. But what do? We passed the bill saying all these great things, and then we didn't fund it. And we allowed the next governor and the next governor not to fund it. And then we come back with the blueprint and say, oh, here it is. 20 years later, this is the answer. Well, it isn't. You know why? Because we're 20 years too late. The governor vetoed the bill for 2 years. So that means we're 2 years behind what Kerwin would have done. But now we had the pandemic. And so the pandemic has put us 4 years to 8 years behind. So yes, you can fund the blueprint. It is not going to be all there is. You have to not only go there, you have to go blueprint 4.0. And not only that, what you know if you've actually worked at the local level is not just inside the school walls. The school does not control healthcare. They do not control economic development. You need the entire government to understand that. As a governor, I do, and will change it. I guarantee you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Baker. You know, you mentioned the pandemic. We're going to talk about the pandemic in terms of how it's impacted jobs in our community. People having a difficult time wanting to stay in jobs. Coppin is well known for all the nurses that it puts out. But in terms of down the road, if elected governor, how will you address the workforce shortage that we're seeing in terms of nurses and other healthcare and frontline workers because of the impacts of the pandemic? We'll start with you, Mr. Franchot.
Well, it is a sector that is very much like education, frankly. The nurses, like the teachers, are burnt out, exhausted, overworked, undervalued, underappreciated. So are the support staffs that work with the healthcare sector. So yeah, we need to do something significant. First, we have to put COVID behind us. Everybody should be vaccinated. It's important. Virus is still out there. And then we need to pay attention to the fact that it's not just compensation. Our best nurses and our best teachers are being recruited away to other systems. But it's not just compensation. It's also whether the state is willing to step up and give them the kind of support that's so crucial to them staying in that profession. Right now, the support teachers in the school system and also in the healthcare system, they're not even coming in to be able to give a break. So we need to do something special for these two sectors particularly. And as governor, I'm going to make sure that every one of them understands that we have their back and that we're going to do what we can to help get them back into some kind of normal professional interaction. And I've run out of time again, unfortunately, but thank you. I'm at least keeping it to 90 seconds.
You were polite. I appreciate that. Mr. Perez.
This is not a new issue, the nursing shortage. This is an issue that's been with us for a long, long time. And we are a majority minority state. I am so proud of that. And one of the things we did when I was on the Montgomery County Council 20 years ago is we have so many foreign-born, foreign-trained healthcare professionals who were sweeping floors. They were underemployed. They had legal status to work here, but they needed a little brushing up. And so instead of going to South Africa and the Philippines to engage in the morally dubious practice of raiding their workforce, why don't we upskill our own workforce at a fraction of the cost? That's exactly what we did. And that is one, but by no means the only intervention. But it illustrates a broader point on this issue of educator work shortage and the nursing work shortage. It's really important and helpful to have someone who's been to the rodeo before. And as your U.S. Labor Secretary, as your Maryland Labor Secretary, and as someone on the county council, we dealt with these issues. And what we have to do is move that pipeline back. We want to take kids in high school. There's a wonderful model, P-TECH model, which is experiential learning. You go to 9th grade. There's one at Carver, one at Dunbar here in Baltimore. We worked on that when I was in the Obama administration. Let's introduce people to experiential learning at an earlier age. That's how we can expand the pipeline. When we do that, that is exactly what we can do. And again, HBCUs can play an indispensable role because our ranks of our nurses and educators need to mirror the ranks of our populations that we serve. We can do this.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Perez. Dr. Siegel?
First, let me just clarify one thing. I was introduced as having founded the Socialist Bread and Roses Party. It's true. But that party no longer exists. I'm back in the Democratic Party, and I'm running in the Democratic primary to be the Democratic candidate for governor. Okay. Well, let me say a couple of things. First of all, young people today are facing probably 70, maybe 80 years of work life. There's a world out there of automation that's going to happen. All sorts of jobs are going to disappear. There are only really two kinds of jobs that really are going to continue to be of value, right? Those that add beauty to the world, goes back as far as history, and those that provide direct service to others. The problem with direct service to others is going to get worse and worse. There's a shortage right now of nurses, but what we've got are baby boomers who are wanting to age at home and not die in nursing homes, right? There's no population out there to provide them with that care at home. My proposal actually is free 4-year college to everybody who graduates from high school in the state. But you've got to put in 1 year of service, right? And I would take those high school graduates who want to go for 4 years to free college and say, what you've got to do is engage, for instance, in providing quasi-nursing services or services for elderly people who are aging at home, and you'll get 4 years. But what will happen in that first year is that they'll be open to something that they're shut off from, which is the joy of service, of actually being of direct importance and value to another human being. And they will change their career choices because of that.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Siegel. I appreciate that.
Just an exacerbation that we saw during COVID. It was an exposure. It was an exposure to the fact that this has existed long before any of us knew what COVID was. Where just in this state we had hundreds of thousands of shortages for people in the nursing profession that needed to be covered down and were not covered down. And so when we think about the unique opportunity that we have right now to be able to address that issue, the reality is we have billions of dollars that are now on tap to be able to, that are coming from the federal government that are earmarked towards elements of job skilling and job retraining. These are elements that we can put people in the proper positions to be able to fill a lot of these vacancies. Another thing that you'll hear about later on today is we have a billions of dollars, $6+ billion structural surplus in the state of Maryland. That is not free. It's because it's been done on the backs of workers. It's because there are vacancies and shortages that we are not filling. And so we have to make sure that we're using this moment and using this generational opportunity where we have capital to be able to focus on reskilling and retraining and making sure we are filling a pipeline. We also have to make sure we're investing in our HBCUs, where we have HBCUs that serve as a direct pipeline to these issues. The challenge is that for our HBCUs to be able to get funding, it seems like they have to sue the state. We have to make sure that our HBCUs are getting the proper supports. And yes, that also includes things like drilling down and on a service year option. And Jerome, I'm glad you read our plan, because we are going to be the first state in this country to have a service year option for every single high school graduate, where they have a chance to have a paid year of service to the state of Maryland and pipeline them into these industries.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Doug Ansler.
The question was about COVID and it's a crisis. And what it does, what COVID has done is it's really highlighted the need for someone with experience, someone who's actually worked the levers of government. And, you know, Rashawn Baker and I have both been served as executives. We have that experience. In fact, we worked together during a crisis, the national mortgage foreclosure crisis, when I was president of all the attorneys general in the United States. And we got almost $2 billion here where we could fight the big banks to make sure that people stayed in their homes and were not foreclosed upon and kicked out. And we were able to do that because we understood how the levers of government work. And so when you look at, as we come out of COVID, what we need to do, we need to rebuild. We need to make sure we have nurses. We need to actually make sure that everybody has equal access to public health. One of the things that COVID sort of highlighted was not only the shortage of nurses, which we need to support Coppin, which has historically been just a wonderful place producing nurses, but to make sure that we are supporting everybody all over the state so they have access to health care. In terms of, and that's a rural and a city thing as well. Not only is it the healthcare piece, but we also need to make sure that we have broadband, that kids can learn from their homes, that people can do their jobs from their homes, because not everybody's going to go back. But we need to make sure that we support economic development in the wake of COVID. We need to do it by making sure we tap into the talents of every Marylander, regardless of the color of their skin, their socioeconomic status, or where they live. Candace Hollingsworth, my lieutenant governor, was the mayor of Hyattsville, and she and I are the only team with executive experience. We look forward to helping the state in future crises.
Thank you, Candace.
Economic problem facing Maryland by far is that the bottom 40% of Marylanders have seen stagnant wages since the 1980s, while income inequality has soared. And our state has made no progress reducing our poverty rate in more than 3 decades. One of what my opponents are offering, frankly, and we've heard it over the last 5 minutes, is more of the same. It's expanding or rolling out one unproven plan after the next to try to address these problems. That's what we've been doing all these years. What I'm offering, and it doesn't work for a simple reason, many programs, even if they're logical sounding and well-intentioned and money behind them, they just don't work, as we've seen too often when the results are measured. What I'm offering is something very different. It is expanding programs that don't just sound like good ideas, but have been tested in the real world and shown to work. So one of my lead initiatives as governor, in my first 100 days, we will launch a partnership with businesses across the state to provide effective job training to every young adult in the state of Maryland who wants to advance. If it's done right, job training can be extremely effective. It's been shown to increase earnings as much as 40%. But the key is to focus the training on fast-growing industries like IT or healthcare, and also to work hand in hand with businesses who provide paid internships to the trainees. So under my plan, the state will pay for the training, the employers will pay for the internships, our economy gets skilled workers, everyone benefits.
Thank you. Mr. Baker.
Thank you. Earlier today, I was walking along Lexington Market with Mayor Young, and out there campaigning, and a gentleman came up to me and he said, "Are you running again?" And I said, "Oh." I said, "Yes, and here's the reason why. Because COVID had happened and George Floyd happened. And at this moment in time, you need somebody that knows what they're doing the moment that they walk into that office. It is not just about the nurses or teachers. It's about the economy. And if you don't know how to actually create government jobs, not private sector jobs, not working with the private sector, but actually doing it from a governor, from government. I had to do that in Prince George's County because when I walked in, we had a $150 million budget deficit. The first thing we had to do, I had all these programs about education, healthcare, but you know what? You can't do any of that if people aren't working, if you don't have income coming in. And so what I had to do was take an economy that was at the bottom in this state and turn it around. And the way we did that is we invested in job opportunities. We took some of that money that the federal government is giving to us, that is one-time money. Peter knows this, and I know this by working on appropriation. That's one time. You invest it. You invest it not in big business, not in some unfounded plan. You invest it in things that are working. So we did EDI fund. We took $50 million from our rainy day fund at a time when the budget was down and invested it in the government. And 8 years later, we led the state 5 years in a row in economic development. If you don't know what you're doing, we will be in a crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Could I ask a technical question? Am I always going to get the first question?
Yes.
Much as great an honor as it is, don't you think we should also allow some other folks
They
to
drew the
have that
questions in this
honor and
order.
privilege? What, excuse me?
Don't shoot the messenger. They drew the questions in this order, and they said that you would be first each time. Mr. Baker would be last.
Geez.
Why? I don't
Normally
know.
what happens is you start at the end. Sometimes you start in, but you keep the
Normally,
same
I get all
order.
the questions first.
Anyway.
This is the way it was
Okay.
told me. I'm just following up.
I'm not complaining. It's a great honor to be the first, number one, but I'm just suggesting that every other forum, they give other people the honor and distinction, but that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, would they like me to change? Okay. You asked, they will shuffle the order.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So we will start with Mr. Baker. This time, Mr. Baker.
That's
You want
horrible.
me to be first? You can be first.
The first shall be last. and the last shall be
I'm
first.
so used to
I
it.
read that somewhere.
Let's talk about income and poverty. You
Yes.
drive along North Avenue and you see so many boarded up, vacants, convenience stores, no grocery stores, nothing major. What would you do as governor to establish more of a economic equity between neighborhoods like Coppin and West Baltimore and other neighborhoods across the city to make it fair for everybody to have a fair shot?
Exactly. It makes no sense. It's unacceptable. This is our major city. This is the jewel of the state. This is our calling card. You have to know how to actually use the tools of the government to do this. It's not just the mayor, the senators, and the delegates and the council members. It's actually the state. No one can do it by itself. The mayor cannot get out of this problem by himself. I couldn't do it in Prince George's County. I needed the tools from the state to come in and help. And where are those tools? One is the Secretary of Commerce has an economic development incentive fund that's $100 million. If we boost that up to $200 million, we can invest in these neighborhoods. We can also combine that with our Department of Housing and Community Development that can come in here and work with the mayor, the council members, and the delegates to do that. Why do I know this works? Because we actually did it. It's proven, tested, and we took it up to Harvard so they could see it. But here's the thing. You have to work hand in hand. And so for me, it is unacceptable for any of our neighborhoods, especially in the jewel of the state, to not see economic development. I know what it's like to go to neighborhoods and there's no grocery store. That's right. I mean, grocery deserts that have been there for years and people have given up.
Mm-hmm.
Suitland was that way when I came in as county executive in Suitland. And you know what? The day I told them we were going to change it around, they said, "We don't believe you." Everybody say that. And they were right. You should not take any of us by our word. You should treat us with a jaundiced eye. Hold us accountable. That's what I want. That is what people did in Prince George's County. And that's why we were able to turn it around. It takes all of us, the community, the federal government, the state government, the federal government, and the local government.
Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Thank you.
Mr. Barron?
Yes. So more than 500,000 Marylanders live below the poverty line. And as I mentioned, our state has made zero progress reducing our state's poverty rate in more than 3 decades. The problem is that much worse in Baltimore, where the poverty rate at 20% is more than twice the state average. We are not succeeding in giving people, students, young adults, others, the skills, the education, the training that they need to succeed in the workforce. A lot of well-intentioned programs, including the largest job training program in the United States, have been tested and found not to actually increase wages. It's a substantial program even here in Maryland. What we need are proven solutions, ones that have been tested and shown to work. I mentioned one of them, partnership that we would launch with businesses to provide proven effective job training programs that are focused on fast-growing industries to every young adult in the state who wants to advance. As other examples, we would expand career academies in high-poverty high schools. These are small learning communities within the high school that have a career theme like biotech or healthcare or information technology, and links with local employers who provide paid internships. They've been shown to increase long-term earnings 11 years later by about $3,000 per person. That's a very substantial improvement. My philanthropic team funded the expansion of career academies in California. We would also launch bold new ideas that I hope to describe later, anti-poverty ideas, income supplements, test them. If they work, then expand them.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Mr. Franchot.
Yes, redlining, which is the old system where the establishment banks and others would deny capital, deny mortgages to neighborhoods where there was concentrations of poverty. That, unfortunately, now it's, it used to be the practice. Then it got camouflaged. As kind of, oh, well, we have a fiduciary responsibility, the banks say, not to invest money in concentrated neighborhoods of poverty. So redlining, sadly, used to be absolutely illegal. Now it's fairly commonplace. And they got it covered up as, oh, we just don't want to invest in those communities because we don't see enough of a profit for our investors. So as the next governor, I'm going to, instead of redlining the neighborhoods, not just in Baltimore, but around the state, that redlining where no capital, no real operating funds, no real relief goes into, I'm going to green line them. I'm going to draw a green circle around them. And I'm going to put capital into Black-owned banks, into minority-owned banks, into small credit unions, into community banks that know their communities and are willing to lend and begin and increase small businesses in those right now abandoned areas. So thank you for shuffling the order. I appreciate it.
No problem. Not a problem at all. Mr. Gansler.
I've been coming to Baltimore for 50 years. I was an Orioles season ticket holder starting in 1989. I worked here every day for 8 years when I was your attorney general. I helped start Year Up, a workforce development program here in Baltimore. I started a lacrosse league called Charm City Youth Lacrosse. We play at Carroll Park, and we've been going for 12, 13 years where we were helping kids get into schools and getting training and have speakers and help them out of their situation. We all know the problems of Baltimore. You're going to hear tonight about everyone said, oh, Baltimore's got this problem and that problem. We've all seen it. And Baltimore is unusual. I was driving here tonight. I was just looking out the window thinking, other cities aren't like this. They don't have these vacants. They don't have these problems. And when I was sitting in front of Terra Cafe on a work call, that's the moment I decided to run for governor 2 years ago. Just watching people that seemed hopeless, aimless, and have no promise going forward. This is a beautiful city. We have you have the port, you have the #1 hospital in the world, you have incredibly smart, talented people. It just needs leadership, and leadership from the state to work with local leaders. There are people that have Baltimore running through their blood. I meet with people all the time in our house or wherever it is, sitting down and say, this is what I want to do, this is what I can do. And we just need a governor that cares about Baltimore, which is why it's going to be so important to elect a Democrat that can actually win, and a Democrat that has experience on criminal justice issues, bringing crime down and bringing justice up, because that's the first place we have to start. People don't feel safe here because they're not safe here. And so we need somebody that has worked in criminal justice. And these are wonderful people, but none of them have ever worked for one moment in the criminal justice system.
Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Gansler. Mr. Moore.
I ran one of the nation's largest poverty fighting organizations. where just in my time as CEO, we allocated north of $650 million and worked with over 1,600 organizations. Best practices to find what works, fund it, and scale it, to include investing millions of dollars right here in Baltimore, right in West Baltimore, with organizations like the Center for Urban Families. So I don't need an explanation or a white paper to understand what we're talking about when it comes to creating economic mobility and addressing poverty. And when people ask me, they say, well, how does poverty show itself? Does it show itself in education and housing and transportation? My answer is yes, because it doesn't pick and choose. It shows itself in the schools you attend. It shows itself in the air you breathe. It shows itself in the water that you drink. It shows itself in the way you are policed. It shows itself in the transportation assets you have or do not have. And the only way we are going to deal with a holistic breakdown is to address it with a holistic buildup. And that means we are going to have to invest in transportation assets that actually move people from where they live to where they work, and actually investing in things like the Red Line, but knowing that it cannot stop there. That we also need to make sure we're investing in things like fair and affordable housing. That one of the greatest, and I was honored to work with people like Senator Antonio Hayes on fair appraisal value in historically redlined neighborhoods, because unfair appraisal values has been one of the greatest wealth thefts that we have seen in this entire state. That we are going to invest in education to teach our young people how not just to be employees, but how to be employers. So when we're talking about experience, it's not just my life experience that leads me to this work. It is my professional experience that knows that there is no option in this next administration but to get this done.
Thank you, Mr. Perez.
You know, my friend Rashawn Baker talked about the fact that you need to deal with this from a local, state, and federal level. And I've had the privilege of addressing this issue from a local, state, and federal level. And here's what I learned, folks, as someone who spent my entire life doing civil rights and labor rights. We need to understand the initial cause. It's about race and racism. The road to nowhere here in Baltimore, that was about race and racism. I prosecuted the two largest fair lending cases in the history of the Fair Housing Act. I settled those cases. One involved residents in the city of Baltimore. The corrosive power of fine print transformed the American dream into the American nightmare for Black and brown people. And I settled those cases. I saw what happened when people are judged by the color of their skin and discriminated against. And what we need to do is a whole of government approach. We need to work. We need a governor who can understand the levers of local government, understand the levers of federal government, understand the levers of philanthropy, and understand and utilize the levers of state government. And that's where I have worked all around in my career. I'm so excited about the plans to redevelop Mondawmin Mall, and I want the state to be a partner in that effort, because that will be incredibly important. 30% of residents in Baltimore don't have access to a car. They're transit dependent. So we obviously have to build the Red Line, but we need to build a regional transit authority. Bus service needs to be reliable. It needs to be affordable. It needs to be free, okay? And it needs to be frequent. We can do that so people can get from where they live to where they work. We need to take people where they are. If you have a criminal history, folks, the future is still yours. We need to take every single person where they are, and that's how we address this.
Thank you, Candidate Perez. Candidate Siegel.
So one advantage of being the oldest person in this campaign is that I've got more complex and diverse government experience than anybody here. So before I spent 25 years at Maryland School of Public Policy, I spent 10 years in USAID working on global poverty. And before I worked on global poverty, I spent 4 years on the Hill, 2 years on the House Budget Committee. Okay, and let me tell you two insights that are relevant to your question. On global poverty, I learned the difference between poverty in the third world and poverty here. In the third world, you've got economies as a whole that are too small and have to grow. In this country, it's very different. People in this country have too little because other people in this country have too much. This country is choking in wealth and income at the top. If we divided things evenly, everybody in this country would have $50,000 after taxes. So the problem of poverty in this country is redistribution of wealth and income. Okay? So that's one insight, and that's why I'm a socialist, because we're not going to pussyfoot around. All right, and let me say something else about House Budget Committee. The other thing I learned, that I wrote about this a half a century ago, The single biggest thing that promotes and perpetuates poverty and loss of home ownership in this country is unemployment. And we get unemployment focused on black and brown people. Why? Because we deliberately, to fight inflation, suppress the economy. And the question is, who pays the price for fighting inflation, right? It's black and brown people who pay it. There are other ways of fighting inflation. And what we'll do, the first thing that we'll do to deal with that is a guaranteed of a job, guaranteed basic employment. Roosevelt talked about this in
Thank you, Dr.
his
Siegel.
fourth State of the Union, and we still don't have it.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel.
A right to a job is the single biggest thing that's going to deal with poverty.
Mr. Perez, you brought up transportation, so I'm going to skip ahead to that. Let's talk about that.
Sure.
According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, they gave Maryland a C for a report card in terms of transportation. A lot of folks in West Baltimore rely on public transportation to get to and from work. So what would your administration do to make our infrastructure better for public transportation for folks who need it for work?
Absolutely. And let's start with the facts. 30% of Baltimoreans don't have a car. 50% don't have ready access to a car to get to work. We have a remarkable potential to be the offshore wind capital of the Eastern Seaboard. $30 to $40 an hour union jobs. But you know what? If it takes you 2 hours to get to work, you're not going to have those jobs. That's why we need a regional transportation authority. We need, as everything I just said about bus service, reliable, frequent, safe, free. We need that so people can get to work. We need to make sure when we're doing these things that we have project labor agreements and community benefit agreements so that the community's at the table, so that as we're building these projects, we're also building the middle class because we're giving people opportunities to get apprenticeships. We need, in my neck of the woods, we need to make sure we finish the Purple Line. Rashern is acutely aware of this. This has been a debacle. It's been a failure of leadership at the state level. We need to build rapid transit down from southern Prince George's County into Charles County. These are the issues that will enable us not only to get people connected to work, but also help us to address our climate challenges. I want to make sure that all the buses are electrified so that, again, we're being smart and we're helping people. That's how we get going in this state. And this governor, one of his biggest failures was eliminating the red line early on. That was an absolute abomination, and that set us back literally decades. Shame on you, Governor Hogan, for doing that. We're going to get this going right away, day one.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Mr. Barron.
Oh, thank you. I strongly support an effective east-west transit solution in Baltimore, probably the red line. We want to see the studies as they go forward, but we absolutely need something for economic development, for, daily life, quality of city life. I mean, 75% of students in Baltimore rely on public transit to get to school. We need a reliable system. So I strongly support a mass transit solution, the east-west, probably the red line. And I was proud of our congressional delegation for moving that up to a top priority in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But that's not all. We need a reliable bus system. I ride the bus to work. I've done it in Montgomery County for 25 years. And I get annoyed because it's about a 90% reliability. So 1 in every 10 days, it doesn't show up or it shows up late. In Baltimore, I've seen the statistics. It's much worse. It's about 75, 80%. That is completely unacceptable. We need to do 3 things. Number 1, we need priority bus lanes. Number 2, we need smart traffic lights that prioritize buses. And number 3, and perhaps most importantly, and we could use this in Montgomery County and in other parts of the state, we need a quality control mechanism. So we're keeping track of what the reliability is and can get it up to 95 or 97, 100% by making sure that if the bus driver doesn't show up that day, there are substitutes that can do it. We need to put in place, those kinds of systems that can really make this a reliable form of public transit.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
You guys can clap. Go ahead.
Yeah, please, a little bit more.
Thank you.
A few weeks back, I went and I said, you know what, if I lived in West Baltimore and I got a job down in Federal Hill, How long would it take me to get to work? And so I went to Mondawmin, took the buses down to go down to Federal Hill. It took me 1 hour and 47 minutes. Let me be clear. I invested tens of millions of dollars in job training programs, to include, again, millions right here in West Baltimore with programs like the Center for Urban Families, where we're helping returning citizens find their way back into employment. And all that is great. But if I cannot get to the job, then what's the point? We need to have transportation assets that actually can get people from where they live to where they work. And it's one of the reasons that I'm so excited to also have Delegate Aruna Miller as my running mate, who is a seasoned and a deeply respected legislator, who served on the Ways and Means and the Appropriations Committee when she was in the House of Delegates, and also is a civil and a transportation engineer by training. And I cannot wait until we can put the billions of dollars that are earmarked towards transportation and infrastructure that are coming to the state of Maryland and put them to work here. That we know that we are going to revitalize and revive the Red Line, because the truth is that the governor returning close to $1 billion to the federal government was disqualifiable. And it wasn't just about the fact that he didn't think the Red Line was important, it was how he did it. Leadership means that even if you do not agree with every aspect, you bring the people back around the table and you say, we are not leaving until this is done. And it means we are going to look at everything that we do with transportation through 3 different lenses: through equity, both in terms of who's doing the work and who can actually utilize it; from an environmental perspective, knowing the fact that the greatest emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions threat is cars, and we needed to have transportation assets that address that; and also, nothing will happen without community involvement. Nothing about us without us.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Franchot.
Yes, this is a great question because it isolates in a silo something that's incredibly important: transportation. And they're right. The study that everybody's citing said that only 9% of people in Baltimore City can get to their workplace in less than an hour on public transportation. So transportation needs to be resolved. Yes, we need the Red Line. Yes, we need a Baltimore Regional Transit Authority. Yes, we need to have on-time paratransit for our disabled citizens. But this issue, like all of these issues, is part of a larger group of issues. So we have education, we have the environment, we have employment, all of these things merging together in our concentrated areas of neighborhood poverty in Baltimore City. Baltimore City is going to have a huge renaissance. Post Ukraine, we're going to see a global restructuring of the economy. We're not going to have Russia as a good faith partner because they're involved in this nightmare. So we're going to have something different. Not sure what it is, but I know the Port of Baltimore, Trade Point Atlantic, the big economic development project there, is going to really put Baltimore in the center of the global logistics reconstruction. And then down in our area in Montgomery County, where we have good metro system, but people are having difficulty coming back to it, we're going to have an intersection between government and technology. Long-winded way of saying we need jobs, we need economic growth, we need a doubling of the GDP so that our citizens can all have good paying family jobs and the benefits that they need. And we can do these different silos. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franchot. Doug Gansler.
When Governor Hogan canceled the Red Line, he essentially took a sledgehammer to the people of Baltimore City. We all talked about the problems. Everyone's got their notes from their consultants. I've actually led government offices here in Maryland for 16 years. And so what we saw in the purple line doesn't happen when I'm in charge. Billions of dollars overrun, years late, and it still hasn't been built. We need mass transit right now. We have so much money, and we need to actually invest it in infrastructure and mass transit. We need the light rail from Branch Avenue into Southern Maryland to Charles County. We need to make sure that we have a way to get from Shady Grove Road to Frederick and 270 after the expansion there on mass transit. We need to expand in the short term MARC service to make sure that people can get around on the trains. We need to have reliable bus service, electric bus service here in Baltimore City, where a third of the people can't get their jobs. And we need to make sure when we have mass transit that we have transit-oriented development around that, including affordable housing for folks that want to work. The Wilson Bridge was made for the subway to go over, for Metro to go over it. It hasn't happened. It needs to happen. But the biggest thing we need to do is recognize electric vehicles are coming. If you watch the Super Bowl, you saw a ton of ads this year on electric vehicles. It's happening whether you want it or not. We have no infrastructure. You walk outside here in West Baltimore and tell me how many charging stations you see. And we don't have that. We need to have a governor that understands the need to make sure we have charging stations and are ready for the advent of electric vehicles, and making sure we're doing it with everybody in mind, regardless of socioeconomic status, with subsidies available for people that don't have the money to charge their bus every night.
Thank
And
you,
we-
Mr. Gansler.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You guys can clap.
What's that?
Dr. Siegel.
So I love public transportation. Right? I went to college taking the subway from the Bronx down to middle of Harlem, actually. I remember the joy, actually, of standing in that first car, not holding on, and trying as the crazy New York trains went through those tunnels at 70 miles an hour to see if I could keep my balance. And the crazy crush of thousands of people in the car, so much that you couldn't even move. And I lived in Paris for 6 months, and it's no accident that the most beautiful city in the world has the best metro, okay? But that said, the issue for America is cars, and as Gansler just said, it's the EV. The problem with the EV is not charging stations, it's the cost of it. The single highest selling EV in the world is the Tesla, starts at $60,000. Who can afford that? What it means is that low-income people are going to get their electric vehicle when they become used cars of the third owners, which means as we head towards meeting zero net emissions, the jokers who are on the road still driving the gas guzzlers are going to be the poor people. And we're going to look at them and say, hey, get off the road. You're the remaining polluter. So what are we going to do about that, about the shaming? And what we need are cheap EVs. We can have them because the second best-selling EV in the world is the Wuling Mini, and it sells for $5,000 in China. And guess who makes them and owns 44% of the company? General Motors makes it. And if I'm governor, we're going to go to Detroit and we're going to say, you produce a $5,000 or $7,000 EV for the United States, or we'll become the purchasing agent and deal with China or deal with Tokyo or deal with Honda, and we'll buy 200,000 of them and resell them to Marylanders. And if we need to, we'll resell them to America. And those guys.
Thank you, candidate Siegel.
That's what it is to be a socialist and exercise some muscle.
Thank you. Mr. Baker.
Really? We love Dr. Siegel. I'm trying to remember the question now. Anyway, I think I do.
Transportation.
There you go. So a couple of things, I want to echo what everyone has said. But here's an interesting thing. My good friend Tom Perez talked about the purple line and knowing something about that. I do. Because when I was county executive and Ike Leggett was county executive, we actually met with Governor Hogan when he came in. But we didn't just talk about the purple line, we talked about the red line, that it was a joint, these all projects were to go together. It was hard fought to get federal funds to do that. And the governor dismissed it. The only reason the purple line is done in the Washington region is because Montgomery County put in $20 million extra dollars and Prince George's County put in $10 million extra dollars into a state project. So we can blame Governor Hogan for the stuff he did not do. But let's be real. We need to blame all of us who served in office over this last 20 years or have been in this city. Just think about it. Somebody talked about, the transportation in the Washington region. That metro didn't happen. The blue line, the green line didn't happen yesterday. It happened over 20 years ago. What other major city than Baltimore City did not see a transit system set up? How does that happen? It is because the governor and the legislature took their eye off the ball. They felt good about the fact that every jurisdiction tells you what your transportation project is. And they said, okay, here's what you get in Baltimore City. Here's what you get in Prince George's County. Rather than leading from the top, getting a transportation secretary that understands our most important city has to have the capacity to get people around it.
Thank
As
you,
governor,
candidate.
we will change that.
Thank you, candidate Baker. All right, they've given me one more question, and then we're going to have some questions from the audience. We're going to talk about something that's happening all over the country, something very, very important is dealing with social justice. Everybody knows what happened in this neighborhood 7 years ago. It was on national TV. We all watched the CBS burn, the death of Freddie Gray, the riots that took in Baltimore, put us on a national spotlight. We're working closely in the city of Baltimore with the consent decree and trying to turn things around with the relationship with the police department. What will you do as governor in terms of working with the General Assembly to encourage accountability in the ranks of law enforcement? Mr. Moore, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. And we need to ensure that we have a police department that moves with appropriate intensity and absolute integrity, and is held to account for both. You know, we look at some of the work that's been done with last year with the General Assembly, and I applaud much of it. The reality is that we needed to be able to remove the law enforcement officer Bill of Rights. Maryland was the first state in the country to have a law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights. It was also the first state in the country to remove it. And there needed to be a new way that we could look at what does become that relationship between law enforcement and our community. That we needed to be able to make sure that as law enforcement officers were being transitioned from one department to another department, that if they have infractions, that should be seen by the new departments. That's not just good for the new jurisdictions. It's important for the jurisdictions to understand who they are getting and who they are receiving. We have to make sure that we're investing in things like crisis intervention teams, because the reality is that law enforcement officers should not be responding to every situation. 41% of 911 calls actually have something to do with a mental health break or mental health snap. So law enforcement officers shouldn't necessarily be the ones who are responding to every single 911 call. But in addition to that, we have to make sure that our citizens feel safe in their own communities, in their own homes, and in their own skin against all threats. The reality is, when, as my mother used to say, if someone does not care about their own future, they don't care about yours either. That we need to make sure we're creating a holistic environment where our children and our families feel safe, where they know they can move and navigate. And I'm proud of the fact of the work that I was able to work on and able to do, to invest in these type of platforms, to invest in police reforming initiatives, because we know that cannot be something that's going to happen in isolation. But how do we think in a broad scope about what does it mean to introduce mechanisms of public safety into our communities and into our lives?
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Perez?
Well, this is another area where I spent a very, very significant amount of my life. To give you a sense of how long ago I started working on police reform issues, I prosecuted an LAPD officer pre-Rodney King. I had hair, I had no replacement parts. It was a long time ago. And as the head of the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department, I oversaw our police reform docket. I was in the trenches. And one of the things, I learned a number of things from, again, over a decade working with communities that had been torn apart by Freddie Gray incidents. When I see Freddie Gray and when I see George Floyd, people are shocked by that. And for me, it was the more things change, the more they stay the same. We've got to stop asking the wrong questions. We've got to stop having false choices. What do I mean by that? Are you on the police's side or are you on the community side? That's a false choice. Do we either reduce crime or we restore public confidence in policing? That's a false choice, folks. We can do both. I have worked on cases, including the LAPD reform, where we learned that you can reduce crime, you can restore confidence in law enforcement, you can get things done. But what we have to do here is recognize that the most important tool that a police officer has in his or her arsenal is the trust of the community. That trust is lacking right now. I applaud what the General Assembly did, but we have more work to do. Implementation, implementation, implementation. So many of your questions tonight, the next governor is going to have to be part of that implementer in chief, part of that multitasker in chief, part of that partner in chief. And that's exactly what I will do if I have the privilege of being your governor, because I've been to this movie. My old division is overseeing the Freddie Gray consent decree.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Mr. Gansler.
I've spent 22 years bringing crime down and bringing justice up. I was an assistant United States attorney in D.C., working under Eric Holder. I had about 3.5 years in homicide. I prosecuted almost every type of case. I went to the Supreme Court of the United States, won a case 9-0 against a sex offender here in Maryland. I'm the only one on the stage, and these are, again, great people. I'm the only one here that's had any experience in criminal justice. And I started on criminal justice reform back in 1989 when I was president of the NAACP Criminal Justice Committee in Montgomery County. We started working on diversity issues at that time. And then when I became state's attorney, we put in the first drug courts in Maryland's history to make sure we kept people out of jail because we lock up way too many folks. I started the first domestic violence dockets in Maryland's history. I started the first family justice center in Maryland's history. These are issues that affect crime every day. We took every shooting, every time a police officer shot someone, we put that case in the grand jury. We need to make sure we have diversity in every police department from the top to the bottom in Maryland. We need to make sure we have mental health available for all of our first responders, including our police officers. We need to have 2 years of experience before you become a police officer. We need to put more better trained police officers on the streets because crime disproportionately affects communities of color and underserved communities. Nobody's getting murdered in Potomac, Maryland tonight. That's just not going to happen. So we need to make sure we have someone who understands the issue, knows the difference between a conviction and an indictment, because that is the most important issue right here in Baltimore City.
Thank you. Mr. Siegel?
So I wrote a book called Graceful Simplicity, The Philosophy and Politics of Simple Living. And let me link it to this issue. You cannot have a good life if you live in fear. You cannot have a simple life that is a life with minimum attention to money if you're afraid to go outside or you're afraid to let your kids go outside. What happens is if the solution is that the neighborhoods remain the same, the solution is to have enough money so you can escape. That's the dynamic. That's the dynamic. People struggling, competing against each other for better jobs, musical chairs, truly, to have enough money to get out of the lousy neighborhoods. Okay? So that's one thing. We're not going to have good life for everyone unless we deal with the issue of fear. The other thing is the police and racism. Well, if you read 1619 Project, what will become clear is the legacy of slavery and the connection of that to the police, right? The police were slave catchers. They returned slaves to the southern states. In the South, the police were squads that patrolled anybody who was off the plantation. So this is America. This is the issue that we've got to deal with. Now, we're talking about accountability boards and putting people on trial and all this stuff. It's great. But you know what? That's not the main thing. What we've got to do is give communities the ability to simply say to the wrong kind of policeman there, no, we're bringing charges against you. Not just that and the other thing. Just simply, not you in my neighborhood.
Thank you,
We've got
Dr.
to
Siegel.
give people, the communities, the right, without putting any charges together, just to simply say, this guy gets reassigned.
Thank you, Dr.
No
Siegel.
questions asked.
Mr. Baker?
I'm going to do like Peter. Oh, you know, when I came as county executive in Prince George's County, first of all, Prince George's County had a reputation of abusing and shooting unarmed African-American males. So much so that when I went to Howard University in '78, they said, don't go across the line to Prince George's County if you're an African-American male. When I came into office, we were under a consent decree with the Justice Department because our police department had shot unarmed African-American males, but yet our crime was rising. And so therein lies the problem. Someone that I met here in Baltimore City said to me, and I think they're right, they said, I don't want my 16-year-old to be jacked by the police or by somebody on the street. Think about that. The first obligation of any executive is to make sure the community is safe. I took that seriously, which is why we implemented the first implicit bias training in our police department. Did they like it? No. Which is why we got rid of the entire training staff. Did it take us a while to get it right? Yes. But by the time I left, we not only had reduced crime by 50%, we also had reduced the rest. And guess what? We put more money into our health departments, into job training, but we didn't do it alone. We actually used the governor's office to help come set up a 311, so you're not calling 911 for a health emergency. We actually put more money into nurses and social workers in our schools. Here's the thing. In this city, we have had over 2,000 murders over the last 8 years. That is unacceptable. It is unacceptable to have that happen over 8 years in our major city.
Dr. Baker, thank you.
Thank you.
Not Dr. Baker. I can make you a doctor.
I got an honorary degree.
Mr. Baker, thank you very much. Peter Franchot.
Yes. When I served in the Army, and as a result, partly because of that, I have zero tolerance for police misconduct. It's unacceptable. The legislature passed a bunch of reforms, and we're going to hold everyone's feet to the fire. But I also have zero tolerance for any kind of crime. And I think we have to recognize that if we don't have public safety, it's very difficult to have a growing economy. If we don't have a growing economy, we're not going to have jobs. We're not going to have good schools. We're not going to have good transportation. We're not going to have any of the benefits that middle class and other families have in the state that are not existing right now in the concentrations of poverty in Baltimore City. So we need to do things. Rashawn is absolutely correct. We need to treat addiction like a public health issue, and we have to have pre-arrest diversion programs so that those individuals are treated compassionately but separately. We need, obviously, to enforce all of the legislation that's been done to hold police accountable. And we can do that because most of the police officers that I meet are professionals. So this is doable. I know recently we brought in the U.S. Marshals and the state police to arrest violent offenders. That's good. We should do that on a regular basis, over and over again, so the small number of repeat violent criminals are removed from the streets. We need to do that on a regular, sustained, month-to-month basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franchot. Mr. Barron?
Thank you. So equity and fairness in our criminal justice system is a basic human right. It's a basic civil right. And more than that, as we've seen, it is sometimes a matter of life and death. People need to feel that the law enforcement is on their side, protecting them, and not the opposite. I was very proud of the General Assembly for passing sweeping police reforms last year, including training, expanded training of police officers, independent investigations of police misconduct, expanded use of body-worn cameras, and others. In implementing those reforms, my approach would be very different than the other candidates. Because as we implement these reforms, what we need to do is figure out which of them are most effective and which are not effective, and we should try something else. But the ones that are most effective, we need to expand. Let me give an example. In the area of police training, there are many different types of training. There's procedural justice training, implicit bias training, use of force training, de-escalation training. Which of those actually work? Which of those work best to increase community trust and reduce police use of force? We don't really know yet. So as we implement them, we need to evaluate them to figure out which actually work and should be expanded. My philanthropic team actually funded one of the first studies in this area of procedural justice, which is a form of policing focused on respect and neutrality. It found very positive initial effects. We should be doing these kind of evaluations repeatedly.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Let's give him a round of applause. Now they have two tough questions, not for me, but people in the audience. Start with you. Introduce yourself and go ahead.
Hello, my name is Chanel, and I'm hoping that you guys are well up there.
Thank you.
My question for you all are, would you say that you're committed to supporting HBCUs? If so, what will you do as governor to ensure that a continued success for Maryland HBCUs and the students who attend them?
You want to direct it to somebody in particular, or? Okay, Westmore.
Great. Chanel, bless you. And thank you so much. And I am actually the grandson of two HBCU grads. HBCUs run deep throughout my family. And not only am I firmly committed to making sure that we are going to support them, I'm firmly committed to making sure that our HBCUs are going to grow. You know, we have 4 of the top HBCUs in America here in the state of Maryland. And if you want to go just outside our borders, go ahead and throw on Howard. right?
Thank you.
And when you think of, you're welcome. And you think about what that means. That means being able to actually honor the unique offering that our HBCUs actually provide. That means even when you're looking at things like the lawsuit that happened between the HBCUs and the state, the fact that even if you have the funding that came in, the reason that we had the lawsuit in the first place still has not been honored. Still has not been honored. And which is the basic idea that let HBCUs grow and thrive in the areas of interest that they have. And frankly, when I think about the work that I've been able to do with HBCUs, we built a platform, we built an initiative. And actually Coppin was one of our first partners in that, where we serve hundreds of students here at Coppin, often first generation, often first and family students, helping them to make it to and through college, because people thought it was just about the cost of tuition. It was not. If you're also not addressing the other issues that HBCU students are dealing with, everything from transportation, food insecurity, housing insecurity, childcare, mental health, we're going to repeatedly miss the point. And so by being able to help the students who are dealing with everything from debt relief to also assisting the students who are on campus right now, the firm commitment of the Moore-Miller administration to HBCU growth is firm, and it will be financed and fulfilled.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Where's Denise? Denise had a question. There you are. Come on over. I don't bite.
Do we all get to comment on Chanel's question or not?
That wasn't the way it was set up, but you know what? Go ahead.
Okay, so
Sorry.
I happen to be a huge HBCU champion, and I noted at the beginning that I was glad Chanel is asking the question, because we have 4 absolutely terrific public HBCUs here in Maryland. We're going to need each and every graduate. We're going to need people who realize that the HBCUs have produced individuals like Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States. We have great graduates from Coppin. So we need to make sure that you're properly funded, and we need to make sure that your role in Maryland is properly recognized. And I would advocate a center of excellence in every HBCU around study of Black history and Black culture. So that is, I commit to you that as I asked Jim Clyburn to come to Maryland to go to us to talk to the young students at Bowie State University. And that was a game-changing opportunity for a lot of these young people. And I just want to make sure the young graduates of Coppin are aware that they should be proud of this institution, and they should go out into the world and do things like run big companies or run for office. Do things that are important, because the HBCUs are super important. My running mate is a 5th generation, or her daughter will be a 5th generation HBCU grad down at, I believe, we're sure it's Howard.
It is Howard.
Yeah.
Mr. Ganser?
Right.
Thank you. So I started the first civil rights department in Maryland's history when I was the Attorney General, and we took on these issues. And HBCUs are so critical. And, you know, it's interesting. Elisha Cummings and I co-chaired Barack Obama's first campaign for president when everyone else was with Hillary Clinton, and that was fine for them to be so. But we had that experience, and he took me to the Mecca's dinner, at Howard University's dinner. Kamala was there, Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris was there, who I served with for 4 years as Attorney General, and saw the promise and the power of what Howard University could do. And thinking about the 4 HBCUs we have here, there's so much promise and power there as well. I mean, Bowie State should have a law school, for example, and Coppin should really be the center for training of nurses and other folks with jobs. We need to create wealth in Maryland. We need to have African-American students come out and create wealth and be the business owners, not just the workers. The workers are clearly important too. Candace Hollingsworth, who was my lieutenant governor, was the mayor of Hyattsville. She turned that city around. After George Floyd, she left and started Our Black Party, which is the national nonprofit with over 20,000 members focused on issues for Black Americans. And she's going to be working on issues for Black Marylanders, and obviously focused on making sure we support, stand up, and are all 4 of our HBCUs here in Maryland.
I'd like to say something as well.
Yeah, no, I think we're all going to say something. At the
That's
end.
fine. I'm just kind of
Okay.
shuffling up the order.
Should I go next? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm a very strong supporter of HBCUs, and I was proud of the settlement, the generous settlement, and I would be, as governor, a full supporter. My running mate, my terrific running mate, Natalie Williams, is a graduate of an HBCU, Virginia State University. Here's one of the concrete ways that I would partner with HBCUs across the state, including Coppin and others. One of the great challenges that some of these universities face, and it's not just HBCUs, but others as well, is that many students who start university don't complete a degree. So some of them, they don't complete a degree. Some of them run up student debt, but they don't complete a degree. That's a huge problem. In some cases, more than half do not complete. There is a solution to this problem. There's a program that was originated by the City University of New York, which my philanthropic team funded to expand to other sites in the United States, where it provides financial support so that students can stay in college. That's number one. But also academic support for low-income students, like developmental classes in writing and math and so on. And the third piece, very important, it requires them to enroll full-time. Because a lot of students, if they're doing it part-time, they're juggling a lot of different things, work, and they never pull it all together. So this program, ASAP is what it's called, it gives them the resources and support to go full-time, but also requires it. When tested in New York and later in Ohio, it was found to increase the graduation rate by 25 to 50%. 25% New York, 50% in Ohio. This is extremely effective. It's not expensive. We should be doing it throughout the state at every HBCU, as well as others.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Mr. Baker.
Thank you. Excuse me. As a graduate, as I said, of an HBCU, who met his wife at that HBCU, whose wife went on to work for UNCF and NAFIO, making sure there's funding for HBCUs. And, I once asked her, what is the biggest issue that you face, working with HBCUs? I asked my wife this in terms of funding. And she said something I think we should all take to heart. If we treated Bowie State, Coppin State, Morgan, like we treat the University of Maryland at College Park, we wouldn't have to worry about a suit. You wouldn't have to sue for rights. This is 2022. But that you need a governor that understands it. You need a governor that understands 8 people go to HBCUs so they don't fail out, because it's a community that actually undergirds you. Our graduates come out and they know exactly what they want to do. They're head of corporations, they run for office. We need to embrace it for what it is. And that these, in my case, I work with Bowie State University. BSU is where I taught when I left the county executive. Some of the brightest students in the world. But we actually brought them into our government to teach our young people. Prince George's Community College. So we also have to look at minority colleges, like our community colleges, and the role they play. Because that's usually the first step before a lot of our folks, young kids, go on to a 4-year institution. So it's not just understanding and saying we'll give them money. It's just treat them. If we treat our HBCUs like we treat the flagship, we will all be fine. But we don't. And so that's why we have to make, so my time's up.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Perez.
Well, as I mentioned before, I'm so honored to have Shannon Sneed as my running mate. Shannon went to undergrad at UMES. I'm sorry, I'm going to offend you in what I'm about to say. She was an AKA. Okay, she wasn't a Delta, but service is the connective tissue between the AKAs and the Deltas, okay?
You're right.
So we can do this. There's room for all of us. Her graduate degree at Morgan and taught right here at the great campus of Coppin State. As I reflect on the settlement, I'm glad that the settlement was reached, but that just took too long. It took way, way too long. I thought I heard somebody just say that. And, civil rights remains the unfinished business of Maryland, and it remains the unfinished business of America. And I started out as a career prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. I had the privilege of ultimately leading the Justice Department, where we did work leading the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, where we worked across the country to make sure our HBCUs everywhere got a fair shake. It shouldn't be this damn hard for HBCUs to get a fair shake. And as your governor, we're going to make sure, because the implementation of all the things we're talking about today, workforce diversity in the nursing and education professions, all of these things we need to do around jobs, transportation. You are front and center in this. And I will be honored to have you as that thought leader and partner and research institution. That lawsuit was simply one part of the process of bringing HBCUs to the prominence that you deserve.
Thank you.
Period.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Dr. Siegel?
So on sort of an abstract level, I always identified with Martin Luther King's dream, the idea of a black and white child going hand in hand. But it's just a dream. It's not reality. It's not America today. And I understand this from my own experience as a Jew and as a Jewish parent. There is this big issue of assimilation, and it's a temptation. We decided to bring our son up with a very strong Jewish identity. We're not religious. We took part in a cooperative Jewish Sunday school where we taught our own classes to our own kids in a way that would be authentic. And for 10 years, I taught the Torah, which I wasn't brought up with. I taught the Bible to young kids. So I understand the importance of maintaining and deepening that identity that's part of your history. There's one thing that concerns me, though, about HBCUs, and it's basically the impoverishment of white education in this country. We don't know our own history. White people in this country are going around with a sack over their head for hundreds of years, not knowing a damn thing about this country. And the one thing that the black community can do and the black colleges can do is to engage the white colleges and challenge them on their education, challenge them on their ignorance.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel.
White America to understand the big question, what is America? And then take on SOBs like Governor DeSantis, who's making fun of being woke, when a great awakening is what we need.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel. Okay, Denise has a question. She wants to sit. She's a little intimidated by this crowd. I can't imagine why she'd be intimidated.
What are your plans for the homeless and the mental health population, because they're being ignored statewide?
And what you don't know about Denise is that she is a nurse who works at Johns Hopkins and helping folks who are homeless transition back into a place to live. And so she wants to know statewide, what are you going to do?
That's correct.
All right, who are we going to start with? All right, Mr. Barron, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a critical issue. Thanks for asking the question, and I am intimidated by you just as you are by the question, as you are by all of us up here. About one-fifth of homeless people have mental illness, severe mental illness like schizophrenia, that's outside of their control. It's a terrible thing, but that's a big part of the homelessness problem. When homeless people are discharged from a mental hospital or from a shelter, often they have nowhere to go and no effective services. There is an approach that was tested in New York City that my philanthropic team, it's been tested and shown to be very effective. I'm going to describe it in a moment. We expanded it to multiple sites in the country. It's called critical time intervention. When the person is coming out of a mental hospital or shelter, it's a critical moment when you can prevent recurrent homelessness by having a caseworker work with them and their families and support system and social services to make sure they have the support around them to prevent repeat homelessness. When it's been tested in multiple places, it has been found to reduce the homelessness rate in this population by about 50%, and importantly, to actually save money. Because if these people end up in shelters or in mental hospitals, again, which are extremely expensive, that costs the government a huge amount of money. So this is something that could really make a major dent in homelessness and is very cost effective.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. No applause?
I like.
Happy to.
Mr. Perez?
Yeah, my wife, Anne Marie, and I've been married 33 years. She's worked 25 years at a place called the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. This has been a family business for us, and not just a vocation, but an avocation, eliminating homelessness. And what I learned firsthand is, first of all, but for the grace of God could go any of us. And we need to understand that and have compassion. As John correctly pointed out, many people experiencing homelessness, and I don't refer to the homeless, I refer to people experiencing homelessness because it is not static. We can change it. We have seen through our work that housing first models can work. If you get somebody housed into something stable, many people have a lot of stuff going on in their lives. They've got a healthcare issue. They have children. They may have a mental health issue. They have a barrier to employment. But if you get stable housing, that housing first model does work. And we've seen it work in a number of places. One of the biggest challenges to addressing this issue is gentrification. The church that we used to go to on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., we have a shelter in the basement of our church, and all around it was Section 8 housing. That's where my kids used to go on Sundays to do service work. That's all been leveled. And now it's all this fancy pants stuff. And where do people who are low income go? The next governor needs to understand that we have an affordable housing crisis in this state. We have a crisis of homelessness that we can cure. But I was the chair of the Interagency Council on Homelessness when I was labor secretary. Why, you might ask, was the labor secretary the chair of the Interagency Council for 2 years? Because this involves many different agencies. If we're going to solve this challenge, it's not just a housing issue, housing, employment, health, and the like. And I'm sure you've experienced this day in and day out. And thank God you are causing good trouble every single day. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Candidate Perez.
I can go.
Mr.
Yeah, I
Franchot?
just want to say thank you for the question also. I love the sweatshirt, good trouble. And it's so important in this time in our country's history to read that. And I just think we need to stop criminalizing addiction and homelessness because they're being pulled off the streets and charged criminally when they should have some kind of civil situation where we can put them in the kind of wraparound services that everybody up here is in favor of. But we need to develop that one-stop shop so that when you find someone in the hospital who's there, that's homeless, that's suffering from mental illness, we can actually put that person in an environment where there are all of the services that we support provided. And that's not going to be a complete panacea, but it's going to be a step up from what we have right now. And I would certainly commit as governor to being a champion for coming up with some form of alternative diversion of folks out of the normal system and into something where they can actually get compassionate treatment and hopefully get back to normal employment. And the other issue is, of course, employment. We need to have jobs. We don't have a rising economy. I'm going to double the GDP in 8 years. We're going to have more jobs. And that's what people basically, I think, lose sometimes their sanity and their health over, not having the ability to support themselves and their family. And housing obviously is key to that. But thank you for the question.
I can do it.
Government's job is to take care of its citizens that can't take care of themselves. And there's no greater example than homelessness as part of that. And while there's many causes of homelessness and a lot of people have different circumstances that brought them there, I mean, Tom is dead right. I mean, it's but for the grace of God. But there's sort of 5 areas that really seem to me the majority of folks that are there. One is they're poor. They need jobs. They need job training. 2 is returning citizens that don't have a job and are sort of denied jobs because of their record, which is something we need to work on when we legalize cannabis to make sure we expunge all the folks that were prosecuted for that. 3rd is veterans, returning veterans, and we need to make sure that they have access to mental health facilities and jobs. 4th is addiction. And Peter mentioned that, which is a huge issue. And we need to make sure we actually have drug courts throughout the state and family justice centers to help get people out of homelessness. And then mental health. And that's that we have, if you go to our website, dougansler.com, you'll see the extremely extensive mental health program there. You know, I was a senior at Yale and when I was in college, and I decided to write my paper on the right of the homeless to vote. And I went out and I met and talked to homeless people. And it was the first time I actually sat down with people and realized that at a very young age that they have the same dreams, ambitions, hopes that we do. They just, their circumstances sometimes put them there. And so as governor, we're going to really focus on the homelessness issue, Baltimore and throughout the state. So I look forward to working with nonprofits to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, and Mr. Nees, bless you, and thank you for your question. You know, when I ran one of the largest poverty-fighting organizations in this country, you know, we allocated, you know, over $650 million. Much of that had to go towards the issue of housing insecurity, because the number one driver in poverty in this country is housing insecurity. Number one. You cannot address the issue of economic mobility or economic growth if you do not address the issue of affordable housing and affordable housing access, period. And when you think about the unique opportunity that we have to get that done, there are a few things that the governor and the state can uniquely do, which we are not doing right now. You know, one is, how are we talking about the idea of the preservation of available inventory that we have on board right now? If you just think about here in the 40th, right? There are thousands of vacant homes here in the 40th alone. And you had initiatives like Project Core, which started making a dent. But the reality is we've got to invest more. We've got to do more to actually deal with the preservation of available inventory and make it actually habitable for people to be able to stay in and survive and live and grow and thrive. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to deal with production. We still need more assets on board. And for people to say we have enough assets, you have not spent any time in our neighborhoods and our communities to believe that's true. We have to actually work with people to develop new assets and produce more. And the third thing is we need better protection for people inside of their homes. Where we're the first campaign to actually call for an eviction moratorium, when during the middle of a pandemic, we had people being thrown out of their homes just as school is getting ready to start. And there are other states that have actually shown leadership on this, unlike this one. So we've got to focus on this idea of the preservation of the production and also the protection of current renters and keeping them inside of their homes.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
So my colleagues here have said, and they're absolutely right. I had the pleasure of working with Anne Marie on homeless issues in the Washington region, and she's done an amazing job. We actually approached it from a regional standpoint, which is what you have to do. As gentrification is happening in the District of Columbia, more and more folks were being homeless in Montgomery County and Prince George's County in Northern Virginia. So when you're dealing with, and it's a very, very difficult issue, because you have two sets. You have one, housing insecurity, which people have talked about. And then you have homeless folks who don't feel safe, who have mental issues. So you have to address it with every asset of the government. And it's hard. You know, we dealt with it for 8 years in Prince George's County. One, you have to actually get people the help they need on the streets. You have to convince them to go into the shelters that you do have, because many of them don't feel safe that way. So in order to do that, they don't want to go, especially if they have a family, or especially if they're a couple. You know, they don't want to go into these shelters because they don't feel safe with their stuff. So we have to provide an adequate level of housing. And of course, the other thing we have to get rid of is everybody has to play their fair share. By that, I mean every neighborhood. When there's time to locate a shelter, and I've gone through this, and we go to a certain neighborhood, they're as liberal as hell until you want to bring some homeless folks in there for the night. And then all of a sudden, no. But there's another neighborhood they want. So we have to do that, and I'd be committed as governor to doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Ricker. Did everybody comment who wanted to
I
comment?
think it was.
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Siegel.
Go ahead, Dr. Siegel.
I can go twice.
So broadly speaking, there are two kinds of people who are homeless. There are people who don't have the money, but could have a home or an apartment if they had. And then there are people suffering from severe mental health problems, so that it's not a question of money. They can't keep a job. If they had some money, they couldn't save it up for the end of the month to pay. They certainly can't manage to be a homeowner themselves. On the first one, we've got to get the fundamentals. The single biggest thing that created homelessness was the recession. People lost their homes. They got bounced out of their homes, and the wealth gap widened because Black homeowners lost their homes, right? It's because of unemployment. That's why a right to a job is so central, okay? And I have a thing on my website. Go to my website and look up guaranteed basic employment. It's a much larger thing. But let me just talk about the mental health part of it, okay? What we're talking about really is a cultural problem. Every society has people who can't function, right? They take care of them differently in every society in human history. Do you remember the injunction to love the stranger from Jesus, from Moses? This country has abandoned its spirituality. What we need actually is to take people in. We need the impoverished middle class, mentally impoverished, spiritually impoverished, to take in people who need help and to raise their kids in a much richer environment of having contact on a daily basis with human beings who aren't privileged like they are.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel. Are we ready to advance to the 2-minute? First of all, wait a minute, did they answer your question?
Yes.
Good job. Now we will do the 2-minute closing remarks. We have an order for that, and we will start with John Barron.
Thank you. I am very pleased. I'm delighted to have a terrific running mate in this race for Lieutenant Governor, Natalie Williams, who has been an effective political leader, nonprofit communications professional with nonprofits. She's also a breast cancer survivor who started a foundation to increase breast cancer awareness for Black women, and she is a Delta. All the candidates in this race share similar goals. We all want to improve education, reduce poverty, homelessness, and the rest. Natalie and my approach to achieving those goals is very different than the others. What they are offering, and we've heard it tonight, is rolling out or expanding one unproven government program after another and hoping that's going to work. We have done that. That is what we have been doing for decades. You can roll the tape back to the governor's elections of the 1990s. They're all talking about the urgent need to improve education and reduce poverty and improve the schools in Baltimore and so on. 20 years from now, will our children look back at this time and say that we faced all of these persistent problems, stagnant education, stagnant wages, stagnant poverty, and we just kept doing the same thing again and again? Or will they say that at this moment in this election, Maryland did something extraordinary? We led the nation. We pioneered a new governing approach based on solutions that don't just sound good, that aren't just well-meaning, but have actually been tested in the real world and shown to make a big difference in people's lives, like the ones I've described here tonight: one-on-one tutoring in the early grades, career academies in high-poverty high schools, critical time intervention for homeless people with severe mental illness. I'll give you one other example. There's a program in Los Angeles we would expand here in Maryland that pairs Black barbershops with pharmacists. When the men come in to get their hair cut, they get screened for high blood pressure, and if needed, they get medication. It's been shown to reduce the rate of uncontrolled hypertension, which is a leading killer of Black men, by more than half. This is a common sense, meeting people where they are. We should be doing it everywhere. If we simply continue on our current course, we're going to be here in another 20 years. Nothing will have changed. Let's do what works, Maryland.
Thank you. Rashawn Baker.
Thank you. Thank you for having this forum tonight and giving us this opportunity to chat with you. My running mate, Nancy Navarro, served on a school board in Montgomery County and then a county council. She's the only woman and the first Latina on that board, on the council. This nation and this state is at an inflection point. What COVID and George Floyd showed us was not the bad side of America, but what was going on all along. We're at a point in our nation's history and in this state. Just think about it. We're in the most diverse state on the East Coast. We're the home of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. Perrin Mitchell, who's a congressman here, is the one who came up with the idea of minority business. All of those things happen here in Maryland. At this point in our history, it's not just about what you say, or even for that matter, what you believe. Because if you can't get it done, then you're serving no one but yourself. I didn't learn that running for governor. I didn't learn that as county executive. I learned that when I was a delegate, when Pete Rollins was the chair of appropriation. And he said, I don't know if you just like to hear yourself talk, or you actually want to get something done. If you want to get something done, let me show you how you move legislation that affect the lives that you talk about every day. Because if you're simply just talking and you don't understand how to get it done, then you're helping no one. That is why at this critical stage in our nation and in our state, John is right. You can't have somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. When I talk about these programs, I don't talk about them and hope they will work. These are things that I've actually done. But more importantly, the things that I failed at as an executive, that I know we can turn around using every tool that's in the governor's ability. But if you don't understand those tools, then you can't help, because by the time you figure it out in this pandemic, it'll be too late. That is why I'm running. Thank you.
Mr. Franchot.
Yes, thank you very much. And I also thank everyone who organized this. It's been a great evening. And I brought my wife of 42 years up, and she's, constantly. Thank you. So I've been your comptroller for 16 years, and I have a lot of people who come up to me around the state and say, you've been a great comptroller. You're going to make a great governor. And I think what they're referring to there is that I created, over the last 16 years, a center of excellence in the comptroller's office. We get every year billions and billions of dollars in tax refunds back to Maryland citizens, and we do on average 2.5 business days. Most of this, unlike every other state agency, we are fraud-free because we have a huge fraud detection system set up. And then, of course, we handle the 800,000 phone calls a year and actually have someone answer the phone. So people, I think, associate me with the proof is in the pudding. March 10th, I reported a $7.5 billion surplus for the state of Maryland. I also promoted then, and it was passed within a week, a gas tax holiday. We have a thank you. We have a AAA bond rating that's rock solid. We have a pension system. I'm chairman of the board of trustees, which is well on its way to being fully funded. And this is the third year in a row that I'm suggesting, that I've ordered unilaterally, that state taxes can wait until July 15th. It's a huge help to small businesses and individuals. So what I've done as comptroller, I think, is great. It's viewed greatly by the citizens, but it's nothing compared to what I could do as governor. And I just want to, I'm going to fix every pothole on every road in Baltimore City. I'm going to pick up the trash in Baltimore City, and I'm going to have every state agency and every city agency answer the phone within 60 seconds. But then we're also going to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're going to create hundreds of thousands of incentives for young adults to stay in Maryland and come to Maryland. If you would live and work and pay taxes for 5 years, we'll forgive your student debt. And then finally, we're going to take care of this healthcare crisis by putting community clinics and federally qualified healthcare clinics in every neighborhood of the state. K through 12 education system I just spoke about. And then we're going to create hundreds of thousands of new homeowners by using state-backed guarantees for mortgages. Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to see you.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you so much. And President Jenkins, thank you for your leadership as well. I was born down in Tacoma Park, but the last memory I had of my father was when he went to a hospital. And his face was unshaven and his clothes were disheveled. And there was assumptions about whether or not he had insurance. When my mother got to the hospital, they asked her questions like, is he prone to exaggeration? And he was released from the hospital with the instructions to go home and get some rest. And if it got worse, to come back. And he died in front of me 5 hours later. And not only do I know his story is not alone, It happened almost 40 years ago to this day, and it's still happening. And so when my mother then moved us up to live with my grandparents up in New York, she got her first job that gave her benefits after my dad died when I was 14 years old. The first job that allowed her to work one job instead of multiple jobs. That job was here in Baltimore at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And it was here that I found a place that I didn't just fall in love with, that I found a place that I would forever call my home. And I knew that I was going to serve this place and I was going to serve people because I was going to fight for people like my mom and I was going to fight for people like my dad. And whether that was leading soldiers in Afghanistan as a member of the 82nd Airborne Division, where I served and led paratroopers, airborne, or whether it was coming back and starting a small, successful business here in Baltimore where we were helping students here at Coppin, helping them make it to and through college, or whether it was being the CEO of one of the largest poverty-fighting organizations in America. Here's what I know. That our ticket and our administration, myself and my running mate, Delegate Aruna Miller, we are the only ticket in this field that is actually led in the executive branch, the legislative branch, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and in the military. I will put my executive experience against anybody in this field. And here's the thing that I also know. It's difficult to talk about how you are going to fix the system when you're not willing to acknowledge that your fingerprints are all over the system that needs fixing. That we are going to be able to go on day one to be able to address issues like creating a 21st century education system. And it's the reason that I'm so proud to have the endorsement of the teachers, 76,000 strong. When we talk about we're going to fix procurement laws, that right now the state of Maryland has guidance for procurement. Is not a goal, it's guidance, because if you never hit it, it's not a goal, it's a suggestion. And the fact that we had 29% suggestion in the state of Maryland, last year the state of Maryland did 14% without zero measures of accountability. That is going to change, and it's the reason that I'm so proud to have more endorsements by members of the Maryland General Assembly than any campaign in this field. And I know that in the military, we learned something in my first days in the military, is a slogan they asked us to live by while I was a combat veteran. And that slogan was this: leave nobody behind. And come January, that will be the new mission of the state of Maryland. We will be a state that leaves nobody behind because we don't have to.
Mr. Perez.
Yeah, tomorrow is the 7th anniversary of Freddie Gray's funeral. After that funeral, I was labor secretary at the time. President Obama asked me to lead the response from the administration. And my cabinet colleagues, about half a dozen, and I came up and we went to Frederick Douglass High School. We listened. We listened to students. The first student said, you know what? I want to be a nurse when I grow up, but I don't know any nurses. The next student said, you know, I'm getting straight A's here at Frederick Douglass, but we don't have as many gifted and talented offerings as they do at Poly and City. You know, I'm just as smart as those kids, but I don't have the same opportunity. And still a third young woman said, you know what? I have trouble sleeping at night because of the gunshots. I remember that like it was yesterday. Jobs, justice, and opportunity. Elusive for so many here and so many across America. And that's been my life's work. I never dreamed in a million years that a kid who grew up in a single parent household, my dad died when I was 12, and my mom almost died that same year. I went to bed that summer in July and August praying that I'd have one parent when I started the 7th grade. And fortunately, I did. And my parents taught me, even though my dad died young, to who you have to keep the ladder down. And that's been my life's work. Jobs, justice, and opportunity, civil rights, labor rights, making sure everyone gets a fair shake. And I've had the privilege of doing it at a local level in Montgomery County as the first Latino elected, at a state level as your secretary of labor licensing and regulation, and at a federal level as the head of the Civil Rights Division and your labor secretary. And folks, you know what? The most important way you can figure out, because we've got a number, everyone is we've got great candidates running for governor, okay? And the best way to figure out what someone's going to do in the future is not simply to listen here tonight. That's one thing you have to do. But you have to study their record, the entirety of their record, and ask the question, who can you trust to deliver on these promises? The next governor is going to have to be the multitasker in chief. The next governor is going to have to be the implementer in chief. And that is what I have done throughout my entire career, bringing folks together, settling strikes, 45,000 Verizon workers on strike from Maine down to Virginia, and brought them together, settled the strike, and they expanded their contract. They extended the contract 4 years later. Folks, that's what leaders have to do, bringing folks together, multitasking, working on these issues of the moment. And again, I invite you and I urge you as you make your decisions here to study what everybody has done and ask that question: who can I trust to deliver on these critical issues that we have discussed? Thank you so much.
Experience matters, and it matters not just because someone like me was in government for 23 years, running a statewide agency that worked with the governor's office, the executive branch. There's a reason why so many governors today were attorneys general, but also as state's attorney in Montgomery County. And it matters because of what Tom was just saying. What you have to look at the body of work, and we have to get a governor that can be elected in November. Nobody's going to elect somebody that has inexperience, has not been vetted, looks in the mirror and says, hey, I'm shaving this morning, I see a governor in the mirror. That's just not going to happen. This is going to be the most Republican year of our lifetime. You're seeing it all over the country. And people are going to they realize we're in a crisis, and they're going to want to elect somebody who's led in the crisis. When gay people were not allowed to marry the person they loved, I led the statewide effort to change that. I was impeached for it in Annapolis by the far right. When we had the Chesapeake Bay was on a D-, almost an F, I did river audits all over the state to turn that tide around. We need to fight climate change going forward. When we had the Beltway snipers, 22 days, I ran the Joint Sniper Task Force, 1,400 law enforcement officers to bring them in 22 days. You know, Baltimore needs a governor. The number one priority of government is to protect its people. We have almost 400, depends on how you're counting, 400 people in this city killed every year. When you're sitting at a red light and you're wondering whether you're about to get carjacked, I'd ask you to think about whether you want to have a governor that is going to bring in community prosecution, where you prosecute by neighborhood, not by crime. So Pigtown, Remington, Druid Hill, Federal Hill has their own prosecutors, working with community police. And we're going to have more and more police officers. They're trained, de-escalation, diversity, cultural training, and pay them so you get top quality officers that have had 2 years of higher education after high school. Because giving a gun to a high school graduate and a badge and just saying, have at it, it's not a great idea. You cannot live in a city where a police officer like Kiana Holly gets murdered and assassinated in her car. When Terrence Green shot one of my police officers, Kyle Ollinger, I didn't send someone to the courtroom. I got in the courtroom. I prosecuted that case. So I'll close on this. When I was state's attorney in Montgomery County, 1.1 million people, we had 13 murders a year. If you want Baltimore to be safe, if you want to eradicate crime, I ask for your vote. If you like having 400 murders a year, if you like what's going on in the criminal justice system here in Baltimore, you should seriously consider voting for one of my colleagues. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Dr. Siegel.
All right. I want to talk about two things that got me riled up. One of them is anybody talking about the endorsement of the teachers. There was no endorsement of the teachers. All of us knocked ourselves out seeking the endorsement of an organization, a particular union, the Maryland State Education Association. And almost all of us went and spoke before 400 delegates at their convention. We did 15-minute one-on-one interviews and filled out very detailed questionnaires. When I spoke there, as I told you earlier, I ripped into the blueprint, which they're very identified with. And standing next to me was the president of that organization, who's been named to the accountability board. And I vowed that I would not implement that part of it that had to do with issues of quality of education. Okay, and guess what? I got a lot of applause twice from these teachers. And when it was over, I wondered, how many of them are going to vote for me? And then the vote came out. And you know what? None of them voted for me. You know why? Because they didn't get a chance to vote for me. There was no vote of the teachers on the 10 of us. What there was a backroom recommendation of a small committee that was put to these teachers, and they were given the choice of saying yes or no to someone who was recommended by somebody else. And what they did was they drew for months all of us into a charade that made it look like there was a serious, deliberative discussion and endorsement process carried on by a group of people who called themselves educators. And in fact, what it was the same old union stuff. And I'm all for unions. My father was a union organizer. He was a garment worker. But there's a difference between the interests of the unions and the values of professionals. And teachers are in both worlds. And when they call themselves educators, they're talking about the values of their profession as educators. And that damn union, in fact, abandoned any educational role and in fact used us to create a charade that what was going on was an endorsement of the teachers. The teachers didn't endorse anybody. The second thing I want to say is the guy who's missing here, Ashwani Jain. Ashwani is a terrific candidate. You know why he's not here? He wasn't invited. I know about it because I only elbowed my way into this forum 2 days ago. He wasn't invited because he's not seeking public financing and he hasn't raised $500,000. And that was the criterion. I got in because I am seeking public financing, but I don't want any votes that Ashwani would have gotten. It's not fair. And I think everybody up here feels the same way, that Ashwani deserves his share and we don't want to knock him out of the race by keeping him out of these platforms and then splitting up the votes that he would have gotten. So I hope this never happens again. It's the only time that anybody has ever been excluded from a forum, and I hope it's the last time. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our candidates. I hope you guys got something out of this. Was it good information? Again, this is our first ever gubernatorial debate, learning curves, but I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for taking your time and come and participate. And I'm going to give it to Mr. Williams to wrap it up.
Come on, let's give our candidates a big hand, if you would, please. We want to thank candidate Baker, candidate Barron, candidate Franchot, candidate Gansler, candidate Moore, and Perez, and Dr. Siegel. We want to thank them for their time and sharing information with us. Let's give our moderator a big hand, Ms. Kelly Swoop. Also give yourselves a big hand. Just a couple of points of order before we leave tonight. Our students will be asking questions as you leave. Please give them a few minutes of your attention and time. It'd be great for you to share your insights and your outcomes. Hopefully we were able to give you the benefit of the information tonight. Don't forget, on Thursday and Friday, we have the EICAC conference. You can go on Coppin's website, coppin.edu, and register for the conference. It's free, it's online. We'd love to have you. We'll ask our candidates if they'll just hold their positions for just a few minutes for a couple of photos. But thank you so much for coming to Coppin State University. The Eagle's Nest, we're glad that you're here. Thank you.